Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Hyden. I'd like to welcome you to the session on smart investing. I'm going to introduce you to the various presenters soon, and then I'll give you a little bit of discussion about myself, and we can go on and talk about these things. So while we're here, please can I ask the members of the panel to introduce themselves and their companies.
I'm Ian Tracey. I'm from Uncapped.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm from ShipShape.
Hi, I'm Piotr. I'm founder of Uncapped.
And hi, I'm Juliette Souliman, and I'm a VC investor at MMC Ventures.
Thanks, everyone. So, like I said, my name is Martin Hyden. I'm one of the partners at Wynne Jones IP. I'm a patent and trademark attorney. So this is not normally the space where I live. Although we do find that IP does become part of the question when it becomes getting access to finance. I've worked with the investors themselves, securing the IP in their investments. I've worked with people seeking investment to try and shape their businesses to make them more attractive, and taking a number of actions there. So IP becomes part of this discussion at some stage. But what we're going to talk about today is getting access to finance. And that's what the people we have here are going to do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask each member of the panel in turn to introduce themselves in more detail and their businesses and what they do, and give us some comments. And then when we've gone through all of that, there's an opportunity to have some group discussion and take any questions that you've got. You can ask any questions you want using the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will try to get to those as much as possible. Obviously, if we can't, then maybe we'll follow up later. So we'll start first. I think I'd like to start with Daniel. Could you please give us some time about what your business is?
Yeah, thanks very much, Martin. So ShipShape was started because trying to find the right individuals at VC firms is a bit like getting into an Uber without a sat-nav. You might end up in the right suburb, but you definitely won't end up at the right address. And the problem basically is that the maps of VC investor space are so poor that actually today's startups really struggle with identifying the right individual investors. So having experienced this problem a number of times, my co-founder Alistair and I decided that actually we're going to tackle this, and we were going to tackle it in a way that other databases weren't doing. And that's by identifying the individuals at VC firms and researching them to be able to highlight if someone's interested in, for example, cancer detection or decentralized finance. Actually, these are the investors that you should go and speak to. So that's ShipShape.
And so, how do you work with people seeking investment? So how does somebody seeking that investment work with you?
Sure. So at this point in time, we're actually testing with startups themselves, but we're also working with university technology transfer offices. We're working with funding intermediaries who act as the intermediaries between one side of the market and the other. And we're also working with VC firms to help them with identifying potential follow-on funders for the investments that they've made already. So startups can get in touch directly, and in future, we won't only recommend which investors, but also which intermediaries they can go to that have the right network for them to go and contact and speak with investors interested in their specific space with a warm introduction.
So is there a certain type of company that's seeking investment that works best with your platform?
So the answer to that is whether or not they need those conversations right away. So we can identify based upon subject and we can all, but it's specifically relevant for those who are looking for check sizes over 500,000, because that's where most VC investors essentially play. We've seen obviously significant check size inflation over the last decade or so in the UK, and really that's where we see VC now starting, whereas maybe a decade ago there would have been smaller check sizes. So 500,000 and over, but actually we can help identify those that you'd want to start building relationships with now, even if that is that 500k check size is a couple of months in the future.
Okay. And are there any characteristics that you think of as, that, if you like, the organisations, the people seeking investment that get good outcomes from this? What are common characteristics for success?
So usually doing something specific. So something, if you were to characterize your business as a medtech or fintech business, without elaborating further, then we're not necessarily that great. So we don't deal with abstract terms. What we do deal with is specific. So if you're helping to connect, for example, a particular piece of the payments infrastructure into sort of international payments, we can actually help with identifying specific investors that are interested in that space. What we don't like doing is essentially saying, well, here's a sort of, if I use the analogy from earlier, here's the suburb called fintech, here are all the people in that area. That's not something that we like doing. We actually like helping those that are doing something specific. So we tend to look for those companies that are doing something high growth, so software, hardware, and other high growth sectors, for example, clean technologies. And obviously those are just big umbrella phrases for lots of high growth businesses that exist underneath that are doing something very specific in what is a large market in the UK, but also potentially a large global market too.
Okay, so you've given us sort of a size you're looking at. You've got that specificity around what the activity is. So here, flip that on the question, what are the sorts of things that stand in the way of success? What are the things that quite often stop it moving forward?
So I would say there's always the degree of readiness of any startup. So I suppose there's a level of filtering that VCs expect to have happened by the time that they're contacted. So would strongly urge against startups reaching out without having sorted out their documentation prior, because you always want to preempt a positive response, and you don't want to be left sort of short-handed when that positive response happens. So preparedness is certainly a key aspect, and that's where we actually see intermediaries playing a good role in the facilitation of ideas to capital. Is actually intermediaries do help with that hygiene factor, that actually anyone who wants to take a business through an investment committee is going to need to see that the documentation is in a way that they're not going to essentially end up with egg on their face by taking that idea through for funding.
Okay. And finally, we've talked very much about the people seeking investment. Is there anything on the other side that you want to do, you'd like to see, where people are perhaps seeking to invest, and what lines them up well with your offering?
So I think actually there are lots of attempts to try and do something in this space. Lots of them require both sides of the market, essentially trying to meet like some sort of giant online Tinder dating platform. And the problem with that is that ultimately investors are often very time poor. So anything that requires effort on their part is unlikely to gain the critical mass and traction. So we actually don't focus on trying to bring investors in actively to participate in our platform. Actually, the fact that they publish content for us is enough of a measure that helps us with improving that algorithm that's already identifying which specific investors are interested in particular topic areas. So that's really, at the moment, we're not focusing on bringing them in actively. However, we might start looking at publishing more content about which VCs are really good at publishing information about what they're interested in. This is something that we think is a growing space because actually marketing by the VC firms can't necessarily keep up with the thinking that's going on in the brains of their investors.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, thanks, Daniel. We'll perhaps come back to some of those subjects a little bit later on. I think it's an interesting space to position yourself. I'd now like to ask Piotr of We Are Uncapped to tell us a bit about his business.
Oh, hi. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm CEO and co-founder of Uncapped, and I spent first half of my career as a VC investor. So I've looked at thousands of companies and invested in plenty of them. However, as I was meeting all these founders, I realized that VC is often not the best way for them to fund their growth. A lot of startups actually found their first product market fit, and now they are spending money on sales, marketing, Google, Facebook ads, a very repeatable part of a business, which is to some extent de-risked. And these founders were giving up all the shares, all the equity in their business to give this money to Google and Facebook. It didn't seem very fair. So 2 years ago, we started to build Uncapped. And what we do, we provide the new asset class, which we provide something in between venture debt and equity for the startups. The startups come to us, we connect to their data, we connect to their payment processor, e-commerce engine, accounting, Google, Facebook. In a couple hours, we analyze their business and we give them a loans of up to today £5 million to fund their growth. So we allow founders to build their business without giving up their shares to the VCs.
Okay, and so basically you judge the risk you do some investigation, judge a bit of risk, and say, right.
Yeah, listen, I think, when I was a VC, I did all this analysis in a very manual way. I was asking the clients to send to the companies to send me their data, send me your cohorts data, send me your revenues. Now we change it by plugging directly to the source. I don't need to ask the company to send me the cohorts if I can automatically calculate this straight from the revenues. And that's why we cut the decision process just a couple hours.
Okay. And what sort of periods are you talking about when you're
it really depends. So if you're an e-commerce company, you're on a scale, usually you want to recoup your money within 3-4 months. So we are aiming to get paid within 6 months. If you are a SaaS company, you should be getting paid within, let's say, 9 to 12 months. So we usually give you the capital, which we repay over 12 months. We try to make sure the terms of the capital we provide you match your needs. So we talk to every single startup still to understand their needs and prepare the product and offer which is tailored specifically to them.
Okay, and so again, I was talking before saying what are the things that these startups need to do to make this work well for them, beyond be successful, obviously.
For them to get funding from us?
Yes.
Well, our approach is very data-driven, right? So we now analyzed tens of thousands of companies, and we know what good looks like. I think the key things you're looking for is, first of all, growth, right? Like if you're a startup, you should be growing. If you're not growing, there's something usually challenging happening with you. Then, we don't want the companies to grow at any cost. We are looking for the companies where we really see that the growth is sustainable. They have good unit economics, good return on the ad spend, good cohorts, good amount of customers coming back. And we pick up these factors in their business, and this is the companies we want to back and want to help them scale.
Okay, and we're talking about startups here. Obviously, how early stage are we on in a startup that is a good candidate, or the sort of business that works well in your environment? How long have they been in existence, do you think?
Sure. Well, we need to have some data, right? But we can start very early. So what we are looking for is just a couple months of revenues and at least 10,000 months of sales. So some of our clients exist only for 3 months and they reach this threshold, and they qualify for a capital.
So is it fair to say, you're looking in a fairly short-term timescale in terms of what you're providing here?
Well, yes and no. Think about of our product as something better than the credit card. It's not something you have to repay, end of a month. We give you several months, but this is something you keep on using and using and using. 80% of our customers stay with us for, frankly, all the time, and they keep taking more and more because we provide them, we recycle this capital and give them more and more, and they scale. And, we just allow them to grow without giving up this equity to the investors. There's one company who was looking to raise, I think, they are now much bigger. When they were smaller, they were looking to raise £2 million of equity. We pitched them to take 1 million from us and 1 million from the VCs. They took it. 6 months later, they grew so much that they raised another round at the valuation 10 times higher. And this £1 million of equity we saved them, today is worth around 30-40 million for the founders.
Yes. So, I mean, I think that's one of the standard things that founders often want. They want to reduce the drain on their equity as much as possible if they're successful.
Exactly.
And so that's what you're offering, is that they're not putting their equity at risk.
Exactly.
As the engagement with you. And so if I understand it correctly, you're really, it's almost like a revolving credit. Yes. You credit for a period, they come back, you change,
exactly.
As it grows, it gets bigger.
Exactly. Although, we are now launching many more products. So, we are very much expanding. Our vision is to become the #1 platform for every startup to operate. We are now launching banking accounts. We're launching FX. We're launching the insights. So on top of just giving you a capital, we are now helping you to grow. We have a platform where we connect you to the best VCs in Europe and the US. So we also help you raise equity. So we are one full-stop shop for every startup to grow.
Okay. And, you've given us some ideas of what you're looking for. What are perhaps the things to avoid? What doesn't work well? Rather than just,
I think,
as opposed to just saying the opposite of what you said is good.
Sure.
I mean,
Great question. I think the problem we see with many startups is we see the very inefficient growth. We see that companies hire too much people. Their operation costs are too high. And, looking from the outside, you can clearly see this is not working, guys. Like, you really grew your costs by 100%, but over the last 9 months there is zero growth in revenues. There's clearly an issue here. So, and this is advice we can give to the startups. We also see the companies overspending on ads. So, trying to spend more and more without seeing any effect. We would encourage them, to maybe curb the spending, maybe try to grow more organically, try to find new channels rather than just blindly spend for in searching for growth.
So you've raised a couple of points there that are quite interesting, which is quite, I think, fairly common with investors, is that they don't just provide money. They provide some advice and some direction to their investment to try and make their money work well. I mean, in a sense, that sounds quite traditional in terms of what a VC investor would do as well, these sorts of things. Would you say that's correct about your business, or is there a difference?
Well, we want to provide insights in a better and smarter way. We want to provide insights in a way which is data-driven and unbiased. I think the problem you have when you have investors on board, they come with their own perspective, with their own biases, which might not be correct. I remember when COVID started, we got advice from some of our VCs who, if I listened, I wouldn't have a business today. You can't listen to anything that your investors are telling you. So, and you have to take it with a pinch of grain. And you always get a lot of different perspectives. So, we don't want to give you the personal, opinion. What we want to give you is, we want to give you the data, we want to give you the insights, the benchmarks, which actually can help you navigate your business, help you manage your business in an objective way.
Yes. Okay. I see we have got a question coming through. I'm going to save this one to a bit later because I think it's one that will probably apply. We can ask everybody in the round there. So thank you, Piotr. Maybe we could move on now. Juliette, could I ask you to give us the benefit of your thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi. Well, I'm clearly on the opposite of the spectrum from Piotr, because obviously more on a traditional model, which is the VC model, but very happy to tackle the point one by one.
Yeah. So again, so you've explained. You say you're a traditional VC model. Explain that to the group. Explain that to the audience.
Let's start by that. Yeah, MNC Ventures. So I work for a fund that's called MNC Ventures. MNC Ventures is one of the largest early stage fund based in the UK. We do anything from pre-seed, seed, and Series A. So that's ticket size from 100K to 25 million. And so we like to support our companies through the journey, the journey from seed to Series A and then onwards. We invest in tech-driven companies that have the ability to scale extremely fast and return our fund, which is our main objective. On top of that, we are a VC that is in the train of the platformization. So in addition to our money, we offer, these added value services such as sitting on your board and helping you to go from 0 to 1 or 1 to 10, depending on where you are in the journey, and helping you with your first hire, your first getting up to speed with the regulation and the GTM, etc.
Okay, so I know that's sort of, as you say, it's fairly typical model of what VC investors look like. So I'll go back to the questions I've asked everybody else. What does a potential investment do to attract your attention and succeed?
Yeah, I think I will be first of all, not every single business is a business that should seek venture money. The type of businesses that should seek type of money are businesses that are on a very, very fast growth trajectory, which has nothing to do, or scalability, I should say, which has nothing to do with the success of the business. But it's more that us as VC, obviously, our goal is to return the fund that we invest. So we're looking for 10x, 20x on our early bets. And so we're seeking for businesses that are capable of returning those very high growth return, which is not the case for every single sector and every single business. Again, that's nothing to do with the successful rate of the business, but it's very much this kind of a special breed of startups that we're looking for.
And over what time scale?
Sorry?
On what time scale are you looking at that sort of investment?
Yeah, so we're pretty, I would say, us at MNC, we're pretty patient capital, but we would be looking for returns within the 8 years, 10 years type of horizon for sure. Okay.
And so would that be a sort of a staged investment, or would that be a investment followed by that period of growth?
Yeah, no, I think in terms of exit perspective, it's one of the key questions that we ask entrepreneur. We are looking for an exit. So exit can become in two sets, an IPO or a more traditional exit, which is an acquisition. And again, for us, it's not about making double our money or 3 times our money. We like to, we like to go for big exit, big potential, big risk, but with large upside.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say, what you've told me sounds very much like what we might call a traditional VC. It's a model that's been used, I've heard for a number of years, and each one has a slightly different approach, but the model is broadly understood. Again, I go back. Are there things that, given that there's a place to start, what's good for, you've said broadly, yes, growth and all of those sorts of things for success. What do people do to get to success in your field? And more to the point, what stops them succeeding?
Yeah, so I would say that as opposite to probably Pietro, we are in the business of bias, clearly. We go for businesses that, as early stage VC, we go for businesses that are pre-revenue often or with very, very limited traction. And so we need to get comfortable with the team behind the project to be able to believe in the capability and the capacity of the execution. So I always say I would prefer to invest in a star team with a B or C product than in a B team with a star product, which sounds very, very cheesy, and many people will tell you that, because the big question is, what is a star team? But for me, expertise, experience, and personality. And again, yes, it's a part of being biased about that. But I think that, building we're looking for outliers in terms of businesses, and hence I think there is a little bit of bias needed when you're trying to look for those outliers, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Right. Well, so at that point, I'm now going to come to ask Ian Tracey. Tell us what you've got to say.
Sure. So I'm Ian Tracey, one of the co-founders of Anchored In. And Anchored In, it does one simple thing, really. It's helping entrepreneurs and early stage companies to understand what needs to be done next. But it works on two levels, on two sides of the coin. We work with a bunch of entrepreneurs on a one-to-one basis, helping them to understand, is it a strategy thing? Is it a money thing? Is it a team thing? But we also work on the other side with the people who worry about the ecosystem, governments, international governments, catapults, and folks like that, helping them to understand what can they do to help the early stage ecosystem of the country to move that forward as a collective. Because if you're a difficult player in the hard tech areas, having a great tech isn't the whole answer. If anything, it's a small part of the answer, and helping the rest of the answer to coalesce around it so that that tech can grow and create jobs and generate wealth for the country. It needs a lot more than great tech. And what we do is we help those bits of the jigsaw come together so that they understand. And it's also feeding into the different sorts of financing that we've been hearing from the rest of the panel today.
So, so how does so let's say we're talking very much here about from the position of somebody seeking finance.
Yeah.
Again, how does somebody engage with you? What works well to make them engage with you and be successful?
So I think if I answer the question, what do I look for as a sign of success, as an indicator of success, and take the question that way, I think 9 times out of 10 it comes down to team. I know Juliette's just said it, but it's that understanding that it's the people that make companies go forward. And I think particularly in the deep tech, big tech space, I find it painful when I see too many people who've got a great idea who seem almost fixated on the idea being the solution, rather than the idea being one of the ingredients that's necessary for a great destination. And if I had to reduce it down to one thing, that would be it.
And so is that is that also one of the things that indicates when things don't go so well? Is that the one of the classic problems about it when there isn't success?
It's that, or in the nicest possible way, an ignorance of looking for alternatives, isn't it? I mean, I think we end up as people having a linear path and wanting a linear path. But when it comes to entrepreneurship, it definitely is a game of trying to be focused and broad at the same time, isn't it? In that you want to check out many options, but then decide on a path that you're taking, be it your finance, your technology, the people you want to work with, and then be very focused in delivering it. And I think sometimes people get fixated on the problems they know how to fix, rather than trying to understand the problems they don't know how to fix and conveniently forget about. I see an awful lot of that, and that can be quite disappointing at times.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. That was it was a good quick start. I think I'd like to sort of put some questions to the group, and one of the points I'd like to pick up on that a couple have raised is that you're very much investing in the team and the individuals that go to make up the team. I was fortunate enough to work in Silicon Valley in the late 1990s, and at a time when VC was very hot and things were moving very, very quickly. And it was very clear that some of those companies and some of the individuals were serial entrepreneurs. People were willing to invest in them multiple times over. So if I can throw out to anyone, what are the sort of characteristics that you see in the individuals or in the teams that attract your attention, that make them interesting? We'll put aside the fact they've done it and been successful before. Track record is great, but if you don't have a track record, what are the other things that are attracting in terms of teams or individuals?
I hear you saying you can put aside the track record, and yeah, we all know that because that's past evidence. I think if you put aside the track record, it's your ability to hunt down people. So I'd be looking at your non-execs and your advisors and your mentors and looking at their track record and relying upon them to spot a winner. Because, if you've got somebody who's got a great track record and they're believing in you, then probably you're worth believing in. So I still think track record plays its part. And that's it for me. I'm going to pass on to somebody else.
Yeah, I was going to ask Juliette, because Juliette also commented on that as an issue.
No, I would definitely second Ian. I think for me, I looked at your ability to attract and retain talent on the lens of the culture. Being able to build a great culture is super important. I tend to prefer people that, are probably more down to earth, coachable, and I've got a bias for nice people. To be fair, I have to say, and I think it's very important. And again, I'm unapologetically biased toward that, and not a shame, I guess.
But in a sense, I mean, you both picked up on 2 points. It's who you can find to work with you, and the individuals. Find somebody who can bring with them their track record, their background, as well as your own. Give you some more depth to the organisation. Piotr, Daniel, have you got anything on that in those sort of areas that you? Because I mean, to some extent, Piotr, it sounded like your approach didn't look at that quite so much. You just said.
Well, we don't look at team at all. We don't look at team at all. I don't even know who gets our money. So we don't care about the gender, the race, where we are. We don't care which country they're in. Nothing.
There you go. Ian, go on.
But he has the luxury of seeing the stats that's proving that the evidence is there. Because if you looked at the starting criteria, it was, I think, 10,000, or it was growth curve, it was this, you know what I mean? Yeah. You have the beauty of looking at the hard evidence that shows that success has started before you back them. Whereas if you was going for a seed play, and I mean, classic SEIS space, I think your technology would struggle, and then you have to delve back onto other intangible markers.
And I think that's a fair point. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that there's what we've seen in the market, and in terms of the way that the market's evolved, and the reason why companies like Uncapped can exist today when 10 years ago almost certainly couldn't, is because actually the level of transparency of data has increased drastically to the point where you're de-risking at an earlier stage. I think there'll always be room and space for those that are essentially looking at other elements and other factors that de-risk where you put your money. I think that's a space that we're really interested in, is essentially what are those factors? And you asked the question earlier, how can we potentially serve investors going forwards? I think actually we can help serve them by generating a large enough data set of transactions, and then looking back through historical data analysis to say, actually, here are perhaps more of the non-measurable factors here are the factors that historically have been non-measurable that we can start to measure, that we can actually definitively state are actually important drivers. Like, for example, I think there have been some studies with regards to what culture does, and actually that has really we've seen that many startups that have gone on to be successful have generated a great culture. Therefore, it's a really good way of a non-statistical measurement of a factor that is important in making that decision later on. So yeah, very much. I think it's really interesting to see how that level of transparency is going to increase going forwards. That's going to enable more and more measurable financial services that are de-risked, like Uncapped, versus those currently, gut feeling is perhaps the wrong word, but I think where there are proxy measurements that are being used rather than measurable metrics.
Thanks. I mean, I think you've all brought out sort of almost leading into the question that we asked. But I mean, it's, what I'm hearing is that, unsurprisingly, this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. There is not one approach. It depends where you are and what you're doing as to which particular model you would use to seek investment. Not all investors have the same approach or value or even contribution they can make to a business. I mean, so there was a question that was asked, which was, and it was actually directed to Piotr, but I think it's to the group, is, what are the reasons that you suggest, if you like, traditional VC versus the uncapped approach of investing there? What are the things that tell you, because you gave an example where you said, okay, instead of taking 2 million, take 1 and we'll do the other one. You save it that way. But obviously there are going to be times when that's not really going to work. It's, you're not going to be there. So we've talked about, have you got data? We've got 2 people who very much look at the, very much about data there. Others, it's before there's really data. Obviously, there's no bright line between these 2. So what are the sort of the transition points that you think?
I think, the key is, what are you trying to fund? And what's the level of risk of this investment? I think I think when I think about it, the companies have 2 levels of risk, or like 2 levels of investment. One is I have the repeatability of my model, and I can measure it, and I know that for every dollar invested in this part of a business, I'm gonna get 1.5, 2, 3, 5, 10 back. And this is, for example, sales marketing. I know that if I hire 5, if I'm a SaaS business, I'm gonna hire 5 more salespeople. After 1 year, I should get their money, their salary back, plus, I don't know, 100, 200, 300%. And then there is a much more risky investment, which is I'm gonna invest in engineers and I'm gonna build new product. I'm gonna build new features. And hey, here, I might get money back, I might get money back. And if I do get my money back, probably it's gonna be in 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And this is the investment for which you should take VC money, because they like to take more risk, but they are paid much more for taking this risk. So we don't fight with VCs. We work with VCs. We have thousands of VCs as our partners. But what we allow the companies and VCs is to dilute less, invest less, and have same return without having to invest much as a capital. Because if you're a VC, also it's in your interest to have a higher return without investing this much. If your company can achieve it without taking any more money, like VCs dilute themselves as well, it's efficient. It's better for both investors and founders.
Well, I think, isn't there the old cliche? It's difficult to go bankrupt with money in the bank. And VC equity is only one part of the mix. I think you see that you've got grants have got a massive part to play. And when you're sitting in a region like Wales, you have got some fantastic grant infrastructure, but also winning those grants can be very powerful as an indicator to show others that you've got what it takes, at the risk of misquoting somebody else's advert somewhere. But I see a risk when I see companies that only go for the devolved government grants. And you see time and time again that they're getting lots of money from their devolved government, but they're struggling outside the region because they're missing that competitive element that comes when you apply for EU or UK-wide grants via Innovate UK. So sometimes the competitive element makes the organization, often it makes the organization better for it. I think you need an element of failure to help.
I mean, that was an interesting point about grants. I mean, how do Juliette, for example, how do you see those sorts of grants? How do they fit in with you?
Yeah, it depends which type of grant, obviously. But often when you look at technologies that are very sit on the edge, deep tech, etc., it's true that having recognized institutions such as Innovate Finance, but also university, research university granting grant is a massive early sign of a potential interesting product. We take that into consideration. Obviously, we see it as non-dilutive capital, which is again great. It's actually completely mutually exclusive. It's great for VC, non-dilutive capital. So yeah, no, absolutely, it's a good sign.
Yeah. Because I think one of the messages that's come across here is that we're talking about different models. They're not exclusive. It's a mix and match, and they can apply at different stages or at the same time, but using them effectively to get the best outcome. You don't have to put all, the cliche, put all your eggs in one basket. You can try and sort these things out. And Daniel, I mean, your facility is matching people up with potential investors. Do you think your approach reflects this different types of investment as well as because you talked about identifying the people who are active in those areas? Do you also identify the type of investment that they make as part of?
So that's actually something we're looking to bring in later this year, is identifying actually what round participation looks like. So identifying the different funders at different stages for different companies. But I think actually taking the sort of the scientific method here, there are areas in which we're able to apply that. So where there are metrics such as what's your cost per click, what's your cost of acquisition of a customer versus what the lifetime value is, that assumes that you've got the metrics there to be able to then make financial decision making in terms of how much risk you're going to take with the capital that you've got. I think on the other side of that equation, you've got actually how is it that we can use historical data to better glean new metrics that enable sort of reduced risk investment decision making off of factors that are difficult to measure directly today, because actually that infrastructure doesn't exist. But actually we're going from a market which 2010 800 million was invested in the UK. I think it was 11.2 billion last year. So the types of measurements that we're going to be able to make going forwards and the incentives to make those measurements is increasing massively. I think it's really, really exciting to see that that happening, and we would definitely want to include that level of insight. But the answer actually is just we need more data. At the moment, there isn't that clarity to enable investors to de-risk other areas where there are non-measurable metrics.
Okay. I mean, hearing it strongly from these two people that data is key. I mean, and to have that, obviously, you've got to be able to put it out there. But that's an interesting one. But it opens up a sort of a question, which is, so we've seen how things have changed, and you've highlighted this point about data availability and the transparency that we've now got that we didn't have. When I sat back in the late 90s, it just wasn't there. So that's changed something. It's time to speculate. What's it going to be like in 5 years' time? Where do we think the changes are going to come into this sort of access to finance for business? What's going to be different? Any thoughts? Start with the traditionalist, Juliette.
I'm not sure my company would like to be called the traditionalist, but I'll take it. I think that the venture capital or the early stage capital in the market is becoming increasingly competitive. And I feel that we will see a shift to ultra specialization from VC firms that will focus on specific verticals and the specific added value that they can have, even more due to the increasing competition for the capital at the moment. it's a very, very good moment to be a startup raising, I would say, at the moment. Considering
Okay.
the moment.
Okay, so for you, it's about specialism. It's about focusing down on a particular area, and that's where it's going to do. Piotr, different view of the world. What's the future going to be?
I think future will be very, very data driven, and I think you already see some VC funds trying to do almost automatic term sheets, like I think NFX. And when I think about us in 5 years, having data for thousands of companies, I think it gives us a huge advantage. And like you have this data real time, and you have access to this data in real time, and you're the first one to have data. I think I'm very excited about what we can do to leverage this for current investments, or maybe launching new products. While maybe we could launch a VC fund one day if we have so much information. So I think funds there's so much competition in the VC industry that I think funds who don't think 5 years forward and think about what's proprietary about them. Like, is it access? Is it brand? Is it value add? I think we'll struggle.
Okay. Ian, you want to?
Sure. I think there's a few interesting things you can put on the table. I think one is you can look at places like the developing world that have a completely different financial outlook and see what tools and techniques they've got and see if they can translate to the very early stage over here. So the ideas that we've been talking about, we've been talking seed upwards. If you're in this country and you want, say, £25,000 to get your idea off the ground, there's not really much out there at the moment. You've got maybe startup loans company with a personal guarantee, but there's not a lot. And there's lots of people, for want of a better word, trapped at that level before they can generate the data or generate the traction or generate the team to open up even an SEIS round. So it could be interesting if we could use this wealth of data on the individual and do a more balanced and fair version of, I'm backing that person because that's an amazing person at 13. Not, well, they've gone to the right school and the mum and dad were all right, so we're going to trust them. And so we could see data actually creating a more equal society, allowing those early bets to be made, because there's a load of money sitting in this country ready to be invested. The UK doesn't have a shortage of startup capital. Is it something like 70% of Europe's startup catapult, you know what I'm trying to say, sits in this country in part through SEIS and other schemes, but we're not getting it out quick enough to the smartest ideas, and perhaps that's where data analytics could help.
Okay. Daniel?
Yeah, I think broadly in agreement. One is that, we've got lots of capital locked up in real estate, for example, in the UK, that isn't being put to particularly good use. I think that Juliette's spot on with regards to specialization, and the fact is that this is a growing market, and VC firms are having to think more and more about how it is that they provide the sorts of services that startups are genuinely looking for. Because there are lots of VC investors that say that they're value add, but actually it's not that different to the type of business coaching in some instances that you can get externally and with very focused expertise. I think the automation angle, likewise, is going to become more prevalent. I suppose where the concern is today is that VCs have kind of been so busy effectively deploying capital elsewhere, in the sense that the number of innovations that we've seen, and yourself, Martin, you've seen from Silicon Valley in the late 90s, the innovations that have just completely changed the world around us, generated by venture capital, are unfortunately in many ways to date have been a much more efficient place to put venture capital money than venture capital itself. I do wonder, though, as to whether or not we're starting to see the point in time where venture capital as the means of translating human capital into financial capital is now approaching. That actually we're arriving at the stage in the economy where we've got a lot of people with brilliant ideas, and actually there is a need to utilize the data that we've got to refocus financial capital actually into that bottleneck itself. I don't think that just throwing more money at the process necessarily makes that happen. I think that there actually has to be some introspection, and I think innovative firms like Uncapped and the approach that MMC Ventures are taking with regards to actually looking at writing smaller checks and taking on more of that risk at an early stage. That's actually where I think that this market is going. Final point, I think, is in 5 years' time, I think that what is ultimately today a very private market is going to look a lot more like a public market. I don't think we're going to get real-time stock trading in unlisted companies necessarily, but I'm sure that will happen in some later stage startups. But I think it's going to look a lot more like a public market. And if we think about what Companies House are doing, I think that's going to, with regards to their API and opening up more and more data, I think we will be moving that way.
Okay. So that's the future. I'd like to maybe step to one side a little bit now. I mean, there are two other areas, I think, in the access to finance part that I see engagement with. One is what is sometimes labeled as due diligence. It's, and it goes with the data. It's finding out, it's the combination both of looking for the information you need to make a decision, but also from the other side, it's making sure that you're in a good shape so that when somebody looks for that information, they see it. So I give you some examples of where I've been working with, either VC or PE investors. Sometimes it's to look at, it's that thing, what can you see? And in my field, it's IP, but it could be anything else. What can you see from the outside today without actually having to go inside and lift the lid? What's publicly available? And in the IP side, you can find a fair bit about that and make a whole bunch of comments about these things. And it's rarely at the level of saying it's worth this. It's more often at the level of saying things like, well, if you're going to hang a lot of value on this, you might want to know that it looks a bit weak. I'm not going to tell you what the number is, but whatever number it is, it may be a bit flexible, as opposed to this looks fairly hard. If you can, it's probably going to stand up to a lot of things. So in terms, you can do sort of a pre-due diligence is one of the things that we've been involved with. On the same side, I've been working with companies seeking investment, saying we want to make ourselves look good. We want to do what we've got to do. So when somebody asks the questions, we can come up with those answers fairly, if it's not immediately there, it takes very little time to come around with it. We can explain everything. We have, a good story, a well-reasoned, supported set of statements we can make. So, a bit about due diligence. You've said what you look for. What do you think that, either tell us a bit about what you're looking for and how you go about looking at them, or alternatively, what an investment might do, knowing that that's what's going to happen. Any thoughts or comments?
So I think just briefly, I don't think we're necessarily looking that deeply at the documentation, but what I will say is that we're interested in sending the right topic in the right direction, and then measuring what other variables and factors are then important in that decision making. So we will be looking at things like, okay, so if we send a startup that does stem cell regeneration technology to a particular investor, and if we repeat that 5 times, which one ended up succeeding and why, is something that's really interesting to us from a data gathering standpoint, to actually understand for which investor is what type of due diligence information actually important. Because I think, Piotr mentioned what's important from their perspective from a due diligence standpoint is actually just a few hard numbers. Whereas for other investors, they'll take a much more balanced approach. And I don't mean balance in any disparaging way. I think Uncapped have found a really good area for them to take those risk judgments. But I think the availability of pre-DD or just publicly accessible DD information is definitely going to go much more the way of a Bloomberg or you've got LexisNexis, for example, and a whole host of other risk solutions out there that are assessing different individual companies, for that information. I think, again, with opening up of data sources, particularly in the UK, via things like open banking and Companies House, we're going to see a lot more automation of that part of the process. I think that feeds into the more public-looking private markets going forwards.
Any other thoughts, comments in that area? No? Good. Then I think it might be time for some success stories. So I'd like each of you to give us an example. I mean, anonymized to protect the successful or guilty. But if you can tell us perhaps a good example where the field you've worked in you think has been particularly successful, and if so, why? I mean, where the point of access to capital made that difference, rather than just it was stoking the boilers and making the thing work. Maybe a but-for story where you think, or one that stands out that you think was a good example of when it works well, and if you can say why it worked well. Volunteers, or I'll pick someone.
I'm happy to start. You can go ahead, Ian.
Yeah.
No, you started.
Oh, cool. So I think we have loads of them. I think I mentioned one, but the one which was very touching for me was one of, I think, our first 50 clients was a small company in the UK, started by a couple. And when we gave them the first advance, I think it was £100,000. Their sales really skyrocketed since then, because they finally managed to buy more inventory and then reinvest in marketing, and they had a good economics. And this is the moment when the business really started to boom. And I think they came, actually, I met the founder 5 months later. She came to me asking for advice. She wanted to raise first VC round, and I actually met her for a coffee. And she told me that, thanks to our funding, they went from business being a side business and doing this part-time and, after hours, to finally doing it full-time and hiring first employees and, really like bringing the business to the proper company. And I think this was, one of the first proud moments when we were building Uncapped. Now we have hundreds of these stories, but I think, this person I managed to meet in person, and like it was such a great feeling that day.
Good. Ian?
There's a nice feeling, isn't there, when you help other people's lives improve?
Yeah.
I think all of us in the room today really like that. I think that the takeaway I have from my success stories is understanding that when you're making a pitch, and it could be for anything, it's understanding what motivates the other side. And the example I'm thinking of, it was above a pub in London. We had the CEO of Innovate UK there, and we gave him 35 tech companies, and it was an open Q&A session. And he was getting a lot of earache from different companies that innovation in the UK is really difficult, and if only somebody gave them more money. And one company stood out, and each company up to now had gone on and said, if only I had £1 million, I could build a product to my customer, the classic, build it and they shall come. And this company stood up and went, yeah, we're doing something that has always been 25 years away from success, nuclear fusion. We're on our third funding round and we've just closed 100 million. And then when you got them to tell their story, each round had a clear set of objectives that made sense for the investors at that point. And the first example was, he said, everybody else has been going around saying free electricity. I'm hugely simplifying it, folks. Free electricity in about 25 years' time. Nobody wants to buy into that. Our first funding round was, we can build something hotter than the sun to destroy all the hospital waste that you can generate. And he went, suddenly you didn't need it to be energy neutral. Energy neutral was not the question. The question was, we destroyed the hospital waste better than anybody else. And he says, and by having his investment story aligned with sensible objectives for each part, the money turned up. And I think sometimes we forget that. We think too big picture and too far down the line. And we don't think, is there another pivot, another way of expressing this story that makes sense for the people today, rather than believing in this huge story in a couple of decades' time. I share that with you for something to ponder about.
Good. I'm just going to interject there. I've been involved with those sorts of projects as well, which have been, we're putting our emphasis on this project now. This is not our long-term goal, but it's the step on the way to it. If we can get this up and running and some investment, we know we're going to be able to have enough to move the next thing forward. So it's not a one-shot, all in one go. It's a process. It's a continually developing thing. Sorry, I interjected. Juliette, success.
I'd be probably shot at sight if I were to name only one of our portfolio, and I like to think they're all successful in their own respect. But I think for me, success is when you find conviction in a market. You've done your homework in a market, and you meet the startup that is aligned with you on this is how we're going to pay in 10 years, and it's going to be a journey, but I believe in the end goal, and I'm going to be your supporter during that journey. And I think, when you find that symbiosis that with an entrepreneur, and it's just for me what success looks like in my job, I believe.
Okay, Daniel.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off pretty abstract, which is kind of the total opposite of what we want to do as a business, and then get quite specific. So actually, a way it was described to us by an intermediary, so they're sort of the recruiters of the venture capital funding world. They're not much loved by either side. Kind of they compared the market to when you get a startup. It's sort of like having an adventurer from sort of medieval or Renaissance Europe, and they're being told that, okay, in order to go and continue your journey, you need to go and find America, or find the route to China, and all that they're given today is one of the maps that the Greeks or Romans drew about what they thought that the entire world looked like. But actually, what we're starting to get is we're understanding where specific places now exist, and actually we can send people off in the right general direction. So that, I think, was a real success story, hearing that back with regards to what we're doing. And then specifically, as a different example, working out with one of our customers that for every analyst that they have working with startups trying to find them VC funding, that we save them about 100,000 a year just through using our platform, this is just our current mission. But actually understanding that, and then knowing that actually, if you flip that around and you realize that they're taking 5%, that actually translates to about 2 million extra in funding per FTE for an intermediary that's going to a brilliant idea on the other side of it. For us, that's a good reason to get up in the morning, and it's a terrific success story, even though we're just under a month having gone live. So for us, that's really exciting.
I mean, and I appreciate, Juliette, you don't want to highlight any of yours. I think we do learn a lot by success stories. I mean, it does highlight, they do bring together a lot of these points that we've all been talking about, but particularly how it's not just the money. Yes, that's the fuel that you need to do it, but you need somebody to be able to harness that effectively, is one of the things. And there are a lot of things you can do both to get into a position to somebody have faith in you, and then take it forward. So I've talked quite a lot. I'd like to throw this one back on you now and say, to the audience at large, what, maybe bust some myths, maybe, try and redirect people a little bit when they're getting things wrong, when they're coming at it with the wrong way, or anything else. So each of you maybe, again, throw something back at you and what you'd like to suggest that people would do, maybe misconceptions, maybe ways they can do that. It's your chance to preach to the world and tell them what, make their lives better. Ian.
What would I tell the audience to make their lives better? You know what? I think I would reduce maybe, I don't know, okay, I'm going to decide you're doing something until you know it's time to stop and then stop doing it. I find there's sometimes too many entrepreneurs who haven't realized it's time to stop, either change direction significantly or do something completely different. And I find it quite painful when I see them plowing ahead because they don't want to have that tough call, with that tough conversation with themselves. So that's one end, quite a negative end, forgive me. And I always tell people that I set myself 3, 6, and 12-month targets, put them in an envelope, and then I look at them again. Not because I think I'm going to hit them, but it's the gap analysis that's interesting. Because I know my first startup did a lot of damage to me because I didn't have the courage to stop and try something completely different. I just believed tomorrow would be a better day if I plowed through with determination and grit, which is really not an optimistic story. So forgive me, everybody, but it is heartfelt.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there because I think it's a message that I pass to my clients. Sometimes a decision to stop something is a positive decision.
It's a horrible one to make, though, isn't it, Martin?
It's a tough one, but it's not as opposed to no decision where things wander.
But we have this mistaken belief, don't we? And I describe it as we look at our heroes the wrong way through the binoculars. You can take an Olympian and you say, what did you do? And they had Weetabix for breakfast and ran 5 times a week. I'm simplifying it tremendously. If I had Weetabix for breakfast and ran 5 times a week, I would never make the Olympic squad because there's so many things missing in me. And I think we sometimes fall into that trap with our entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So I think, but like I say, it's a message I give people when I'm advising them on portfolios and particularly managing the money. That the way you manage the money is by stopping doing certain things sometimes to free up the resources to do something new and good and interesting. And getting held back by the past is a real problem in a field like mine, where I can be looking at things that are 20 years old.
It also includes mental energy, doesn't it? I mean, yes. Financial is a big piece, but I think when we're looking at the space that we're working with, the entrepreneurs that we're working with, never underestimate the importance of mental energy and how that gets damaged by not taking those tough calls.
No, as I say, it's a point I make to people a lot. Juliette, thoughts?
Probably a bit of a controversial, all things considered, but for me, it's build relationship as early as possible. It's a relationship game. We like it or we don't like it. It's still a relationship game. To give you a bit of data point, on average, a VC will probably see in London at least 5,000 pitch deck, take 400 meetings face-to-face, and make 10 bets per year. And so to become one of those 5,000 and be one of those 10, it's hugely competitive, and it comes to relationship. It's never too early to get to build relationship with a VC. And it's, by the way, a two-way street. My due diligence on the person, you need to be as due diligence that I am with me or any of the other VCs that you consider working with, because at the end of the day, you get in them in the cap table, and it's like a marriage with from the good and the worst.
Yes. So the relationship. I mean, it's an interesting point because we're sitting here in our various rooms, staring at screens and through cameras, which is And I was thinking coming into this that traditionally we would all have met up together, and there'd be the audience would be with us, and we'd have a chance to talk, and probably a cup of coffee or something afterwards, and just that's how we are used to forming relationships. Do you think that the relationship forming is are we now in a new way of doing that, or is this a challenge? Is this something we're really going to have to deal with?
Sorry, Juliette, but I can tell you the companies we're working with, we're now able to get meetings with both coasts of America and China. And, I struggle to get investors to disappear to Cardiff. No offense, Cardiff, you're a beautiful city, don't get me wrong, but it's not London. Now you can get these people traveling the world because it's all a Zoom or a hopping away.
I totally agree with that. I think the beauty of this lockdown is to completely level up everybody, regardless of where you're based. You're not disadvantaged if you're not in London, or if you're in Cardiff, or if you're in Paris, or whatever. You're actually, if you have a computer, you can talk to a VC, and I think it's quite great. There is also one thing is that I think if your personal branding and your ability to portray well online is becoming a very, very, very important skill, and you can see that the on Amazon the video flash setting is becoming the must-have for any picture, and I think it's huge asset and something quite interesting to see.
But I think it's the other way, isn't it, Juliette? Is that, if anything, the cities like London have now got to rethink their competitive edge, because it's not because of the tube network anymore, which is what it used to be simplistically. Now the playing field has got level, and London's got the problem.
Okay. So in a sense, would it be fair to say that the advice is you've got to work out how to be able to, do this relationship building as we are doing now? Putting some focus into that, because we can always take that and do it live, but it's difficult sometimes to do it the other way around. So a bit more focus on that would be interesting. Anyway, sorry, Daniel.
I was just going to say, we started out hoping to, I think, like quite a lot of, there are a number of ideas in this space looking to try and level the notion that you need to have relationships to really go and get investment. I think actually one of the harshest realizations is, no, that's still the case, and we've had to rethink the way that our business is going to work. But basically, utilizing the fact that we're actually in a really good place to pinpoint not just the individual, but also thanks to a very good idea. Actually, who do I know, or who do I know in the same organization that I'm in? That can actually make that introduction for me, and to build that relationship. So not just the relationships that we've got in our own network that we're actively maintaining, but also the passive networks that actually we've kind of documented anyway. We're just not utilizing properly today. We've all got thousands of people on LinkedIn that we're notionally connected with and could probably reach out to, but we just don't know why we would necessarily at one point in time. I think the next level of sort of connectivity might well be going down that route. And I think Juliette and Ian's point, for most transactions where trust is required, actually a relationship is required to build it. So I suppose same lesson.
Okay, Piotr, last word.
Last word. I think there's probably a lot of founders here who are listening to this, because it's aimed at them. So I'd like to give every founder the advice to take care of their mental health, and remember that their company is not them, and they are much more than the business they're building. And they should remember this and stay sane.
Good. We have had one question from the floor. I don't know if there are any others. If anybody's out there wants to ask anything, then now is a good time to do so by the chat. I found this quite interesting, as I say, coming at it from an outsider, but having had some engagement with it. It's reaffirmed that sort of, and I've said it before, it's not a one size fits all. There are lots of dimensions to this. There are lots of issues about it. And it's, I suppose one of the things is that if anything, it feels like it's easier to get in touch now than it was in the past. You don't just have to have a friend who works at Silicon Valley Bank. There are platforms that are out there to do all of that stuff and make it available. And so that I think was very interesting. I think also the fact of the, mix and match, find the things that fit, find the types of finance, and that we've talked about two specific ones here, but there are others. There's the grants, there's those sorts of things, and I know we've certainly encountered some clients at that level. So that's certainly very interesting. And the one area perhaps that we haven't touched on really is the very, very beginning, that initial seed, the angels as they were, This one here. Right. Sorry, just looking at a comment there. Everybody apologising for being shy. We've actually finished a little bit early. Is there anything that anybody else feels that they'd like to raise? There's nothing from the floor. I think then probably going to invite if we're all finished, then that'd be fine. Maybe we can invite them to close the room.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, and thanks everyone for their efforts here.
Thank you.
All right, then.
Thanks, folks. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.